Thank you, everyone. Great to see you in this, guys. Let's get right to it. I love this quote by Ruben. And actually, before I start, what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you some background and context for the project, because what they're doing is actually something pretty unusual in that they're creating new works, and there are some things I don't even know what they look like yet. So, but I think it's very important for you to have this context. And I love this quote by Ruben. And I think what you will, pardon me, I tried the inhaler. I think what you'll find with their work is that there's an incredible, part of understanding them is to realize the incredible freedom and independent spirit that runs throughout everything they do. Will this work as a cue? Oh, he wasn't looking. Okay, famous pairs. Lennon and McCarthy, Picasso and Matisse, the Wright brothers, Fred and Ginger, Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, Theo and Vincent van Gogh, Simone de Beauvoir and Paul Sartre. We are fascinated by how two work together. I think one of the pairs that really got me thinking about, in relationship to the Toledos the most, was the wonderful American designers Ray and Charles Eames, husband and wife, who working together over the years really dramatically changed modern architecture and furniture design. They had, their studio was an ecology of play and invention, and I think also embodied that spirit of freedom and doing what you need to do. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, I had to, because I talk with my hands. This is going to be hard. Okay. So that brings us to Ruben Toledo and Isabel Toledo. As I said, creative pairs. We are fascinated by them. What happens when two people come together around a common desire to explore and make work? You've already seen it. Okay, just once. All right. I love this drawing by Ruben because I think this is, for me, really about what their creative collaboration is about. As you can see, she's got her knitting needles, he's got his paintbrush, and there's a continuation of where one starts and one leaves off, and I think that is also very much a part of the story. A lot of times people think collaboration is, well, this person does this part of it, and then I turn it over to this person and they finish it. And that's not what we're dealing with here. Well, how did we get to this point? Why is the show even here? Couple reasons. First is the lovely, the wonderful, we miss him dearly, Charles Kleibacher. How many of you knew Charles? Well, we miss him. His spirit looms large with this project. So the Toledo's connection to the museum comes through Charles. Those of you who don't know Charles, he was adjunct curator here from 2000 until his passing in 2010. That followed a 40-year career in New York, in Paris, where he was a fashion designer. He was known as Master of the Bias. I think you see him tweaking the fabric right there. And during that time in New York, he met the very young Ruben and Isabel, and they became fast friends. And I think when you see some of Isabel's designs, you can understand why there was this connection. So Charles was a designer for many, many years, but then came to Columbus to really build the textile and clothing department at Ohio State. And he was there till 95. When the Toledos knew that when the Toledos were interacting with Charles, and actually they had, at that point near the end of his life, they knew that the new building was coming, and they'd said, well, when you've got the new building, we'll come and we'll do something. We'd love to do something for the museum. We love Charles. And today we'll talk about what that something really is. So second reason why this show is happening now and the way it is I think because of who the museum is, who the museum has gradually become over the past decade. We are, as we all know, about creativity. It's our core value. It's about thinking like an artist. And I've just got some images up here of some of the projects, from the Connector series that we've done, like working with a barber, doing a public mural, talk show, to encouraging kids to really use their imagination. And so we are a different kind of museum than a lot of other museums. And for me, it was really important in thinking about how we were going to pursue a project with Ruben and Isabel, that we really bring that into the project. Well, why should we care about creativity? It's a fundamental human impulse. It initiates and sets us apart and sets us on a path of problem solving, thinking, and making. So each day we make choices. We make choices about what shoes we're going to wear. Yay! You like the Sam Edelmans? Yes, they're right. How we're going to dress ourselves, what dishes we're going to use, what couch we want. All of these things, fashion and design, are really a whole part of the creative process. And it's only really recently that fashion and design have entered their way into the museum world, and a little more on that in a while. But fashion and design for me are the living arts. And so we have all of these forces coming together. We've got this great creative couple. We've got this moment at the museum. We've got an opportunity to continue Charles' legacy. So how do we present an exhibition that allows us to peer into the process and results of artists making art from their perspective? And I want to also say that, there isn't a meeting that I have with Ruben and Isabel when we don't talk about Charles and we don't talk about his spirit. Okay, the story of Ruben and Isabel reads a little bit like a movie. They were both born in Cuba. I guess that pointer works. I don't have to keep dancing across. Where'd I put it? Oh, doesn't matter. I'll dance. There we go. That's a little Isabel with her mama on the beach in Cuba. She was raised in a small town about 40 miles outside of Havana. And this is Ruben with his papa. Both families came to the United States in 67, 68. So to escape what was going on in Cuba, they were part of that whole emigration. Both families landed in West New York City, New Jersey. They did not know each other. In fact, they didn't meet until they were in Spanish class in 9th grade. For Ruben, it was love at first sight. For Isabel, not so much. It took her about 4 years to sort of see Ruben for what he was, which is her soulmate. And I love this photo of them as a young couple running around New York City. Now, there are a couple elements I'm going to point out today that for me, I think are really important in understanding who they are as artists. I think being Cuban and being emigres, their ideal about this country and what it means to America, also as Latinos in America, is very, very strong impulse in their work. I also love this. You can see she was a fashionista from the get-go. Isabel used to, she was like a 15-year-old kid. She'd get dressed up. Boys would take her to the clubs in New York City, and because she looked kind of cool, they would get into the club. This is a beautiful young portrait of the two of them. So as teens, when they've got together, now she finally saw through his artwork. She liked his artwork, she said, before she liked him. They started running around in New York City. Now, they started running around, but I'm going to pause here because there's another factor and an element I want you to know about. That's the sewing machine. Okay. You're going to see this in the exhibition, but it's not going to look like this, and I'm not going to tell you how it's transformed because I want it to be a surprise when we do the walkthrough with the show. Sewing machine. So when they came to this country, both Isabel's parents were working, and to keep the babies, Isabel didn't want a babysitter, but they talked her into it because said the babysitter will show you how to sew. And Isabel was the youngest. She always got the hand-me-downs. None of her clothes fit her, so she started making her own clothes. And then her father bought her a sewing machine. And this is the sewing machine that he bought her, that she still has today and she uses. She refers to herself as a seamstress, not as a designer. This is for her it's really interesting that she aligns herself. Anybody see the recent Dior movie? And it really, when the new Rafe Simmons, the artistic director, comes in, and the women who are there's a model where the designer is really sort of an editor, and the women in the shops are the ones that are really figuring out how to construct them, how to sew them, how to put them together. That's the kind of designer that Isabel is. Okay, so remember that. So another factor in her life is Diana Vreeland. Anybody know Diana Vreeland? No one. So Diana Vreeland was, 1936, she walks across the dance floor. She's a young woman, just moved to New York City, and she's very distinctive looking. And the then editor of Harper's Bazaar stopped her, and she was very well appointed. And next thing you know, Diana Vreeland, this young woman, is working at Harper's Bazaar, worked her way up, was editor of Harper's for many years, then became editor of Vogue until 1970 when she was 70 years old. And then she became, first she was a consultant, and then she became really the director, the curator of the Costume Institute at the Met, and built it into what it is today, because as she said, I was 70. What was I going to do, retire? And this is a great picture of Diana Vreeland from that period. This is an Andy Warhol that he did of her for a cover of Interview magazine. What you're seeing here, this is installation of photos of two of the installations that Diana Vreeland did. I mentioned earlier that the relationship of fashion, or the presence of fashion in museums, has changed dramatically. It's because of this woman. So the Met come on, Harriet. The Met, if you were involved in fashion, you were the silly stepchild. I mean, fashion was not serious. There wasn't scholarship. What was it? Well, she slowly began to change all of that, and by doing things like putting clothing in the context of art and artifacts, which now is de rigueur when you go to see a costume exhibition at the Met. In my mind, the Alexander McQueen exhibition, did anybody see that? That was at the Met, which is probably one of the best exhibitions I've ever seen, period. Would not have been possible without Diana Vreeland. So how is Diana Vreeland important to Isabel? Well, she was young, she was in New York City, she tried to go to fashion school for a couple minutes, but instead she ended up being an intern for Diana Vreeland for 4 years. So what she did for 4 years was she was in there, she said, Couture is a language, and I learned it the way a child does, by immersion. Couture is a language, and I learned it the way a child does, by immersion. So she learned fashion from the inside out, and that's another key to understanding what she does. So there she was with all the other volunteers who come in, working on and mending a garment by Vianney or Madame Gris or Balenciaga. And so she really got to understand what construction, what the inside, what it takes to put couture together. And again, I think that ties beautifully into her basic passion for sewing. Okay, so while she's spending her days at the Met, she's running around New York with Ruben at the Mud Club. Anybody been to the Mud Club? Okay. Became very good friends with Klaus Nomi, Jerry Arias, and I show you these people because, again, I'm trying to give you a sense of what they came from and what really has infused their energy. Klaus was a countertenor who was also a performance artist and was very big on the scene in New York, and they became fast friends. She often did costumes for their performances, performed with both of these. Actually, Joey's still with us. Performed with David Bowie and others. So it was this scene in New York where performance, music, art, fashion, it was all very fluid. And the expectation in hanging out in those circles was that you didn't have any boundaries and you weren't supposed to do what was expected. So again, all of that influenced them. Here, the Cramps playing at Club 57. Anybody been to Club 57? Okay. Keith Haring was a friend. Gave them, but again, very young. They were like 16 and 17. Andy Warhol also took a liking to them, and advice he gave to Ruben was quit school. Ruben went to Parsons for like 5 minutes. And he said, quit school, do what you're doing, but do it bigger. And the other thing, one of the reasons why I think Keith is interesting to think about in terms of Ruben's work is that Keith Haring was a social activist. He did graffiti art, pop art. It was in the public space. And Ruben, who has always drawn and is an illustrator, and he's done fashion illustrator, but he's also done a lot of commentary. And at the heart of it, Ruben is a social commentary. And I think he saw Keith as a really great example to follow. Ruben was also influenced by people that were hanging out in that scene that were on the fashion end, like Antonio Lopez, who was one, and I loved this drawing by Antonio of Andy Warhol, but what Antonio was really known as one of the great fashion illustrators at the time, but he was hanging out in the downtown New York scene. The more I thought about Ruben's work, I think there's, and he and I talked a little bit about it, there's also this homage to Hogarth. If you want to get it, when you look at Ruben's drawings, he did a dictionary of style. And it's always done with irony, and he doesn't take fashion too seriously. I've got I think a fun image coming up that really influenced him. The other big influence that runs throughout both of their works in slightly different ways is surrealism. You can see it from, oftentimes they juxtapose things that you wouldn't expect to juxtapose, and it's funny. There is humor in this. There's humor in some of the shapes that Isabel creates, or some of the exaggerations that Ruben has in his drawings. Also, this image of the silhouette, as you see throughout their work, really, they are very much, both of them in different ways, are fascinated by shape and form. But again, I think if you think of the lower downtown club scene, art scene in the late 70s, early 80s, and surrealism, all of that rolls together to create who Ruben and Isabel are today. And this I love. I hadn't seen this before, but this is an early piece that they did with a jewelry maker. That's actually a glass eye in here, and here's the drawing that Ruben did after Isabel described what she wanted to do. More about that in a moment. Okay, so the obligatory biography, you know. They actually got married 3 times. Because the first time they went to City Hall, they had their families. Fortunately, their families didn't speak English. And they said, no, you gotta, get the blood test, you gotta do this and that. And they said, well, can you just fake it so they think we're getting married? So they went through it and they filled out the paperwork. They weren't really married. The family threw rice. Everybody's happy. They went on their honeymoon. They then came back and like a month later officially got married, and then the third time they got married in a church. Interesting about Isabel, I mean, they've won a lot of really wonderful awards, and a couple things we'll talk about. She was actually creative director of Anne Klein in 2006 and 7, which I didn't realize. And you begin to see then some of the people that they've been collaborating with over the years. Okay, so let's walk through the history of the project. How we got to the it. Okay, so we know Charles has sort of opened the pathway. We've got, we need to do something that really is very much a museum project around creativity. So we went to visit. This is the building that they live in, and they occupy the top floors. That's one of the views. This, you can see, is one of the big rooms on the back side. It's all living and studio, kind of all combined together. You might recognize, obviously this is during the process of the show a little later on, see the invitation for art celebration and some other designs that they did. I want to take a moment just to, because again, I think this talks about who they are. See that up there? So one of the many collaborations they've done, and I love them because they do very haute couture to shoes for Payless. It's kind of all the same. They've worked with Lane Bryant, and they've done a perfume line for Lane Bryant, and actually we're going to have there's a new perfume coming out, and we're going to have that in the shop, which is wonderful. So they designed a perfume line called Hot House Beauties, and the shape of the bottle is inspired by the cupola of their building. And not only, so Isabel designed the fragrances, and then Ruben designed the packaging. Remember? It's all from the inside out. And even when they did their cosmetics for MAC, the inside of the boxes are as beautiful as the outside of the boxes. Her lining and hems of her dresses are as exquisite as the outside of her pieces. Here's another great view. This is actually very funny because it's staged. She never sits at a desk. But it gives you an idea of, this is actually an older piece, of how they work. One of the things about Ruben, and she knew it from, very early age, he never stops. He never stops drawing. We knew, so as we went to New York, went into this glorious space, and we started talking, and we knew a couple things. We knew that the gallery we would be working with is the north end of the Geraldine Schottenstein Gallery. We knew we had these walls, and we have these wonderful windows. And we started talking, and they've recently done, not recently, but in the last 10 years, they've done a couple retrospective exhibitions where they present the gowns on mannequins. They have some of his drawings. They talk about the interplay, the yin and yang back and forth into their process, but in a very traditional, what you'd expect to see in a fashion exhibition, mannequins lined up with schmatas on. I mean, they're nicer than schmatas, but nice dresses on. And said, okay, we've got an opportunity here. We believe in creativity at the museum. Let's do a show that tries to get to, that demonstrates, what is your creative collaboration about? What does it mean for you? And we can use that then as an example for how, an example of how artists, how people, regardless of what field they're working in, collaborate and come up with ideas. Because at the end of the day, what they talk about and why she says she's a seamstress is because for them, the creativity is about problem solving. And they both repeat that again and again. So we said, okay, now it becomes more like an artist project. We're commissioning, in a way, artists to create new work. So we started talking back and forth, and the ideas began to germinate. The drawings started. I think first I'm going to talk to you about, and Isabel kept saying, okay, we want to do this and we're going to dress the space, which I thought was kind of interesting. So we started looking at the window, and then really early on they said, okay, if this is about our process, we work together but we work differently, and we want to present a diary. And in the center of the exhibition will be two 25-foot-long tables, one for each. And on each will be elements that they feel represents the diary of their artistic process. Okay, so we're just going to do, when I go, it's just one at a time. Okay. So we started with these windows. And Ruben started doing these drawings. And the idea was about, okay, we want these shapes, we want these mannequins suspended in here. And they're kind of the basic shapes that Isabel works with. Next. And what we're going to do is mannequins, which Ruben has designed their mannequins since 1990, and he works with a major mannequin designer, Ralph Pucci. So when you go into a high-end store and you see a mannequin that looks a little different, it's probably a Ralph Pucci. And they've been working for years. So these figures the mannequins themselves are covered in black silk. Paper taffeta is the name of the project. And these are then, on them are prototypes of Isabel's designs over the years. She's one of those designers who goes back and back. And what they're going to do is they're going to float in the windows. It's called the alphabet. And if you've been by at night, you've seen them. And what's also really cool is actually you see the army of ghosts behind them. They won't be there when the show comes, but right now more mannequins are sort of hovering out there. These 7 garments represent the alphabet, the basic vocabulary of shapes that she has gone back to over the years. They're not garments to be worn, but they are her vocabulary, which is why she calls it the alphabet. Now, why would they use the windows in that way? Well, for me, there's a couple things. Obviously, the relationship, this is a Bendel's window, dressed, which looks pretty spectacular. I don't know who the designer of this window was. But obviously, there is a great tradition of clothes and mannequins and windows. But for me, and because they're always pulling from all kinds of sources, I really see that they thought about this in relationship to the architecture of the building, and there is a great tradition in ancient architecture of the caryatids, the female figure who becomes the column and supports the building. So that was my little art history comparison. Um, then we started to work on the model, and remember I said about those two tables. So when you come into the gallery, you will be met by actually a wall painting by Ruben. But the heart of it will be these two tables with the elements on them. Ruben's, I can tell you about Ruben's. On his table, and his table is this one, will be a big roll. And then it's pulled, and it's a drawing. So it's like, he calls it art by the yard. Again, I love that they don't take themselves too seriously, but it's one of his fabulous drawings, paintings on this endless roll of art, because he is constantly drawing. What you're also seeing here are a series of new works called woven drawings, or they're weave paintings. And when we started talking, these are brand new works. These are 17 feet long. There are 7 pieces of this rolled paper that are literally basket woven together and painted. What we've been able to figure out, because we're installing them now, is they're painted, and then they're woven, and then the top painting happens. And that was all done on the floor of their big studio. So fabric obviously is very important to both of them. So what he's doing is essentially making a play on traditional painting by weaving the drawing together to create his imagery. And what I love about these paintings, in many ways, this is also a diary for Ruben. And what you will see on here are figures that he's been painting for years. You will see colors and textures that make you think very much of the whitewashed buildings in Cuba. These kind of grates that you see here, this decorative piece, directly recalls the balconies in Cuba, and ornate grate work, and then the figures that are always an important part of his paintings. So there's the alphabet, and here I love his little this is for the model, so it's this big. This is called an eye chart, and when you see it, it is, we just hung it, it's spectacular. It is, as you would read an eye chart, but it is, again, a lexicon of forms and female figures throughout their career, ending with a big I at the front. It changed when he finished it. So this room kind of sets up the vocabulary. And then on the other side, here's where the tables are. Ruben is going to come in and paint a mural. And then there are going to be 12 of mannequins with 12 of Isabel's garments will be here. So you will really have, she's still selecting them. I think they're going to be mostly gold and silver pieces from her career. So we'll sort of get a retrospective look at her fashion designs. But imagine 12, we call it the landscape of ladies, 12 ladies floating and overseeing the process that helped create them on those tables. And I hope you've all seen already the birdland in the sculpture garden. So remember I mentioned Ralph Pucci? It was 86, and Ruben was asked to design some little figures. And these are half mannequin, so they're half female, half birds. And so he came up with these bird figures, little, and then a Japanese collector wanted them big. So they made them out of fiberglass, and then Ralph Pucci has produced several of these. They very much wanted them in the garden. It was really important to them that they be seen in the context of, great figurative or great sculpture. And so having them in opposition to the Maillot was very important, that wonderful reclining figure, as well as the Calder. Now you'll see there's the little pebbles there, which is the shadow. So I'm in New York, and there were thunderstorms, and then it was sunny, then there were thunderstorms. And I was supposed to see them the next day, and I called to check in, and Ruben said, we're on the roof. And they have their own series of birdland. They said, we're on the roof, and we're trying to beat the rain. And I said, well, what are you doing? Well, we're working on the shadow. I said, okay. So the next day, I went, and there was craft paper. They pulled out, and we went down to one of the studio spaces and laid out this, craft paper, which is, what is that? It's like 10 feet by 6 feet or something, taped together. And they had been drawing and changing what the shadow should look like. And they said, we want the shadow under the girls, because they're a flock, they're in conversation, and we want it to be black pebbles. And so I said, fine, and they folded it up. It was like this. They said, okay, now take this back, and you can do it. So I got on the plane the next day with which was really fun. We brought it in, and we laid out the template, and then using, this is the genius of our exhibition people, it's black aquarium gravel. So it drains very nicely. But again, this playing with silhouette and shape, even to what a shadow might look like, is very important to them. I want to talk a little bit about the collaboration that I mentioned before. And this is all out of order. Excellent. Excellent. I know this. I think I know it. Anyway. All right. So they were asked to create the costumes, do the lighting, and the stage set for After Midnight, which was a Broadway show. And here you see, yes, that's K.D. Lang. Here you see Ruben's drawings. Isabel's, I've seen this one. It's gorgeous. And so this was a publicity shot that they did. And in talking to them about it, they said, because we'd never done this before, we started talking to the costumers. And they said, okay, you have to use, this crappy fabric and this. And, the lights, you can only use these colors because the lights reflect off of them. And they said, no. What do you mean? And so they, literally working with them, totally changed what these, very accomplished theater costume designers and lighting designers have been doing for years and years. And they showed them that actually, no, if you take this kind of fabric and you add this to it so it makes that kind of noise when she moves, and you shine a different light on it, you'll have the effect you want. So again, this thinking in a different way, which is why their collaborations, I think, are kind of so wonderful. Here is one of Ruben's wonderful drawings. You can see how the clothes move. Lane Bryant. She was asked a number of years ago to create a line for Lane Bryant. She said it's very important for her to make clothes for every woman, every size. And you can actually still find some of these on eBay. They're not in the stores anymore, even though the perfume is. But this sort of love of pattern and a beautiful shape, and how it reveals and works with a woman's body. Unlike a lot of male designers who, for example, when we see some of her clothes in a minute, you'll see that there are some really exaggerated shapes. Some people talk about her in the legacy of Charles James, who made these really elaborate, constructed pieces. I mean, he was all about the shape and the sculpture, and you couldn't move in them. He didn't care about the female walking through space or feeling comfortable. She does.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah?
Question. Will any of those dresses, or will there be a nod to that, or is that just something for us to know? Because this is a huge topic right now in popular media. The fact that so many, like Orange is the New Black, a lot of the cast can't get designers to design
For them because they're...
their bodies are not typical body size, so it's a huge media thing. So I think this is a point of pride.
It's a point of pride for them. I don't know how we'll...
There may not be anything tangible, but we can talk about it.
Yeah. Pay less. When I first heard of it, I said, what? And they're great shoes, and you can really not... Well, actually, if you have a big... I have a size 6. You can't find too many on eBay, but I would encourage you to look if you are not a size 6. I got a pair of boots. Anyway. MAC Cosmetics, again, they were... Because they float in all these different worlds, they were invited a number of years ago, and MAC's been really good about this. They work with different artists in creating lines. And here's the box. I didn't bring my box. But again, this box, when you open up the lipstick box, there is decoration on the inside. And they're beautiful colors. They've also done ceramic tile for this really high-end Italian design company, Ceramica Bardelli. And here you can really begin to see what is Ruben's iconic style of drawing and his love of the silhouette. And Penguin invited him to do the covers of some of their classics, which we also have in our store. I bought the Jane Austen. That was really terrific. And as I mentioned before, their work with Ralph Pucci, this was an exhibition that was at the Museum of Design in New York. These three are Ruben's mannequin designs, again in collaboration with Ralph Pucci. This is Andre Poutman. I don't remember who that is. And here you can see a nice detail of the Birdland ladies who are currently in the garden. Now, don't run, not yet. Okay, he's going, I got you. All right, so she's a fashion designer. And early on, she did her first show in 98? No. 95. Her invitation was written on ladies' white gloves. It was a work of denim because that's all she could afford. They didn't know what a show was until somebody had heard about them and called Ruben and said, so are you having a fashion show? Fashion Week's coming up. And he goes, well, what is that? And sure, we'll do it. And Bill Cunningham, the great photographer, showed up and other people, and that's sort of how it started. So Isabel began, like a lot of other independent designers, doing runway shows. She stopped doing runway shows actually in 98. And the reason for that is it's really expensive. It takes all your time. She's, just in terms of, I think you're getting the sense of how independent and a little different they are. She's always been called like the designer's designer. Like just below the radar, didn't have big financial backing. And she was finding that she could make clothes, and they were being sold at Bendel's and Bergdorf's, Ikram in Chicago in small quantities. And then she had control. And it's one of the things that's always been very, very, very important for her. However, there have been a couple projects she's done more recently, and I wanted to, maybe we can even fast forward through some of this because you can see her clothing in action. She was invited to she did this because there was a master class involved in Barcelona around their fashion week, and she did a fashion show. So let's see if the video plays. No. Is it not going to play? If it doesn't play, I will post it for you because I don't want to have to act it out. You don't want me to act it out. I wanted you, because I wanted you to see the clothes in movement. I probably didn't, when I copied it, I don't know. Anyway, okay, well, all right, I will post it so you guys, there you are, Megan. So you can see it, because there are a couple things I want you to look at. Look at the different shapes, look at the materials, and look what happens when they walk. There are especially some flowy, those ladies, sorry guys, but ladies, you know from wearing long dresses what happens when you often walk like this. That doesn't happen with Isabel's designs, and I'll show you with some real examples why. But here's some still photos to begin to give you a better sense of what she's about. She's been called a radical classicist. She is, I love the designs because they are timeless. Remember, she keeps going back to shapes. This is a shape, which is also in one of the prototypes, that is from the 90s. And this use of lace and how she uses lace, again, she's been doing from very early on. These transparent sleeves, the zippers, are really beautiful. So then, and I thought this was really fun, then they were invited to do a fashion show. Remember I said she doesn't do fashion shows? Well, she does sometimes. Good friends of theirs opened this very high-end condo complex in Miami Beach, and so they had a fashion show. You can also see this kind of brocade pattern is very Isabel, and I love that crazy hat. It was at the same time that she was launching her memoir book, Roots of Style, which is available in the shop, and I highly recommend it. And it is the best primer on what they're about, and it's beautifully written, it's very funny, and at the end, she has sort of her list of advice for us, which is great. So they did that in 15, and my last visit, New York, I went in, and usually when you walk in, the work that she's doing for clients. Now she works exclusively for clients. You cannot buy her works in any of the shops. She has found it is much more satisfying. It works out financially, but she works with individual clients, and each season they come, they know each other, and she designs for them. So usually I go in, and of course I'm going through seeing what the new clothing is. And when I went in, there were these jackets. So what the hotel has asked them to do is to create the uniforms for the concierge, the doormen, all of the service people are going to be wearing Ruben and Isabel clothes, and the dresses for the sales manager are really wonderful. So I just thought that was pretty great. I looked and I said something to her. She goes, "I don't think you can afford me, Sarah." I said, "Yeah." Okay, so here's another little insight. And I'm sorry, I'm just sort of tagging together little stories today. But one of Ruben's iconic images, I guess I should use the pointer and not jump around. This is the Wheel of Fashion. And if you start looking at, you can get a little bit of sense of his whimsy, and see, Tim makes fun of poodle-looking people and designs and how it's all a machine and the gears turn, and then we just kind of go round and around in the Wheel of Fortune, Wheel of Fashion. And here's another variation of it. So when Pam and I were talking to Ruben, pardon me, talking to Ruben and Isabel, Pam said, love to have, to produce a scarf, because the Victoria and Albert in London did an image of this. Said, sure, some of the dimensions I'll design it for you, and I'll work out the layout, and then you can go ahead and do it. And we kept waiting and waiting, and these people work 24/7. They do not have people. Actually, Ruben and Isabel kind of run the whole thing themselves. I don't know how they do it because they've always got a million projects. And they're very timely, but the design wasn't coming, and it wasn't coming. And finally what arrived was he did one just for us. So, and look at it. So this is the latest version of the fashion wheel. And there it says Bodies at Work, the title of the exhibition. And these shapes, and what's really wonderful is when you see the eye chart painting, again, this is earlier work, and so now as his work is evolving and the forms are different, and it's the 21st century now. It's a drawing, ink drawing that we have downstairs that we have to return. But anyway, so we will have a black on white scarf and a white on black scarf. So, very much. And you probably saw in some of the weave paintings that there are these dancing figures around them that are also very Matisse looking. Okay, let's talk about Isabel for a minute. So here she is. I should also mention they're both the same height, and they're both gorgeous. And she started, what makes her different, besides all of the factors I've been talking about, is the fact that she does everything design-wise in her head. So, Ruben calls her a little computer. So when she has an idea, and she works from feelings, she doesn't design a look, she doesn't do a season by an idea. You know how you watch all the fashion shows, and this season I was about the girl who loved candy and to travel and, all of that. I'm making fun and I love this stuff, but anyway, that's not how she thinks. She has a feeling, an idea, and she works it all in her head, and she thinks three-dimensionally. Then she talks to Ruben, and he draws it out, and then she goes, oh, okay, hadn't thought of that. And then they start going back and forth, and then she starts draping. The material, fabric's really important. Most of their fabrics are created for them. There are looms that they work with in France, in Switzerland, and in Italy. And those, oftentimes, Ruben will send them sketches, watercolors, and they'll do samples. So when I go to visit, oftentimes I'll see a mannequin draped with a fabric sample that's in different hues, different variations, and then from that, again, they go back and forth and they decide. But she does all of this in her head. So here's an example of a very early velvet dress with this wacky wave hem, and here's the sketch. So this is more of a finished sketch, but I want you to get the sense that before we got to there were these sketches and there were conversations going back and forth. And that's what I want people to get a sense of when they come see the exhibition. And it isn't that she dictates to him. It's that they have a conversation. Because she said oftentimes he will interpret something, what she says, in a way that she hadn't anticipated it. And that's the yin and yang of collaboration. Collaboration isn't about agreeing on everything. And they disagree on stuff. They have very different personalities, but that keeps the volleying go back and forth. And one of the interesting things they said is that there's enough trust there, which is also very important for collaboration, that when one of them is stuck, they know the other one can kind of pick up and knows to do that. And I remember reading about Charles and Ray Eames, and they also had that kind of, okay, you get to the wall, and then the other one can take the ball and run with it. So let's look at some of Isabel's pieces. So remember, she started with denim because they couldn't afford to do anything else. One of her earliest forms this was called the hermaphrodite design. Her clothes have been categorized in as different approaches. Origami, because some of them she folds. I'll show you an origami in a minute. Suspension, and this is like a suspension dress. Shadow, and that's usually the lace pieces. Shape, like here. Liquid architecture, I'll show you that in a minute. Organic geometry and manipulated surfaces. We're not going to really use those. When you read about her, you might see those categories. We're not going to really use those, but it might help you as you talk about some of the pieces. So what the suspension dress is about, and the hermaphrodite is really funny because it's chiffon, and then there are the cords are pulled through it, and then you can cinch it up kind of how you want. And, you know, if you're in that mood, you can cinch it up and you can be a guy. Oh, come on, guys, it's funny. Or you don't have to. But anyway, so again, she's playing with all of these different forms, which if you remember the 90s, it was a very different aesthetic. What you've got here is actually one of the prototypes that will be on those mannequins in the north window. And this is a basic shape that then, depending on how you put the strings in it, can become the hermaphrodite. This piece, which I would kill for, is pagoda dress and jacket, which also is one of the iconic shapes that'll be in the window. It's from 96, 97, and it's made of blue and white brocade, cotton, and silk. And here, hopefully you can see a little bit of the detail of the kind of fabric that they are drawn from. She's very aware of how light hits fabric. This is a really wonderful, this got her a lot of acclaim early on. She was, at the beginning of her career, before she sort of went underground, considered, one of the great young talents. She and Marc Jacobs were coming up at the same time. This is silk. It's called the packing dress. And that's what it's made of. So remember I said she thinks about this in her head. So she thinks she's curious about. Remember, creativity is about curiosity, problem solving. What happens when you put a circle on the body in different places? What happens when you cut the holes, which she's done in different places, and then hang it on the body? What happens? So that sense of experimentation goes through the work. This dress, I hope you can see, there are like these little tubes, it's called half moons, of jersey which fall. Now you can see the relationship to Charles, why they loved each other, because she also played a lot with jersey early on. These pieces, which are these are the diamond draped bodice dresses from the fall of 2005. So one of the things I think we may see on her diary table is how she creates pleats. She uses acupuncture pins. So there is this meticulous stretching of the jersey, the pinning, the stretching, the pinning, the stretching, the pinning. Again, everything. She does not add embellishment to her garments that cannot be made in her studio with her seamstresses. The caterpillar, can we look at the next one? So this might start to get you an idea of how she was thinking. So the question was, what if you have a seam in the front and the back that's the same, and how can it drape and create movement? This is the front of the garment. This is the back. They are made the seam is actually identical. To suspend the way in which the jersey is suspended around the body is the same. The way she cinched it up here, it distributes the weight. These are the things she thinks about. How do you distribute the weight of the jersey so that it allows for movement, and how it then, whether it's around your bum or around the front of your bodice, how does that work? And she figured that out. One of the things, there'll probably be some elements in the show that again talk about this, what her forms come from. I think of her very much as a sculptor architect, because again, she's thinking in 3 dimensions. She's not thinking, I think some designers do think more flat in patterns, in pattern making. She came to pattern making late. She eventually learned how to make patterns, but that's not how she started out. This is one of the examples of the origami pieces, and this is actually, there's a whole series of coats, and actually she used this on Michelle Obama's coat, which we'll look at in a minute. It's called the tube coat, and basically she figured a way to make the top half of a coat out of a long, long rectangle that then's folded in different ways and structured so it allows the collar to weigh a certain way, it allows it to fall on your back a certain way, and then all kinds of variations that she can do. This tells you she does amazing things with lace. It's becoming more and more difficult because a lot of the lace looms are going out of business. But she does everything from boiled wool lace to very, very fine silk or cotton lace as well. This coat is all made up of pieces, triangles like the slice of a pie. This series of dresses they're based on paintings by Ruben. She was working on something in the studio with white muslin, and he got some of his paint on it. And she's like, oh, well, why don't you keep going? And so he ended up doing this whole series. And there's beautiful Isabel. Okay, so the reason many of us know Isabel, unless we were on the inside of fashion world, is because of what happened in January 2009. Michelle Obama had been a fan of Isabel, worn her pieces before, bought them at Ikram in Chicago, which is a really wonderful boutique. And as we know, Michelle Obama, one of the great things is, whether it's J. Crew or Jason Wu or this Cuban immigrant, she looks at fashion across the board. And she had asked Isabel, she'd asked a number of designers, because she liked her work, to design something, produce something for Inauguration Day. They did not know until they saw on television that Michelle had actually decided to wear this. So you can imagine the bedlam in the studio. But what she did is, and I think this really goes to the heart of her creative problem solving. She said, okay, she calls it, Isabel calls this lemongrass color. She said it's a yellow-green. She said yellow is a color of optimism. Traditionally, the first ladies wear blue or red. She said it's winter. It's January in D.C. I want her to be warm. This is lined with pashmina, so she would be warm, but it'd also be breathable. Said, I want a certain kind of lace that's layered over so that when the light hits it, it'll sparkle, and I want her to be comfortable and feel elegant. And it was, I think, for both of them, a brilliant, brilliant choice. And the fact that again, I come back to the fact that they're Cuban emigres, and they very much believe that spirit of This country has given us so much. It's why we came here. It's why it's been so welcoming to us. It's really important. And I would imagine that could have been one of the things that Michelle was thinking about when she was deciding who she was going to wear on that very special day. Okay, Ruben. Let's not forget about Ruben. Ruben has been, remember I showed you the Antonio Lopez drawings. So he really was a fashion illustrator, hustler. He was the one who would go around and sell Isabel's garments to the different stores. But he was so talented, and he's had a really wonderful career doing, this is a set actually for a photo shoot, as is this, painting for Nordstrom's, for Barney's, for Bergdorf's. I love these. These are from a couple years ago. These were photo shoots he did for Nordstrom's, fashion illustrations. This is a new outfits by Celine for a magazine. They've done a number of projects with museums. The Phoenix Art Museum has a really wonderful fashion collection, and they just did a big historical exhibition, and they asked Ruben to do the murals, the backdrops for this huge show, which he designed, and then they did them in vinyl because he couldn't, which is fine. I mean, but you can get a sense of, I mean, he couldn't spend 3 weeks out there painting. It's another Nordstrom's. Here's from one of his fashion books. But you can see even there's such great attitude and fun, even as he's describing those. I love this. It's Isabel. He paints and draws her constantly. Yes, his women do look like Isabel. The Roots of Style book that you will want to read is illustrated by Ruben. And just 9 months ago, the Lexington Hotel, if you're at Lexington and 51st in New York, you will want to go around the corner to the elevator because Ruben, they've renovated it back to its Art Deco glamour, and Ruben did these murals all through that, which is kind of wonderful. And perhaps one of my favorites, problem is this is out of print, but if you come to my office, maybe I'll show you. His style dictionary, which is beautiful and funny and biting. And, you know, he did the whole dictionary, C for corset, which I love. Yep. And, you know, this was published in 1990, and one of the things I've said to Ruben, it would be great to do the sort of the version forward, the 21st century version. You know, you can see the inspiration of Andy Warhol in here. Andy, who also did a lot of shoes. So he really follows that tradition. I was visiting them on their birthday weekend. This, I think, is very typical. Did I do them? Yeah, because she's looking at us and he's looking at her. It's kind of, that's one of his paintings. So now you can see, okay, here's what's going on in the gallery now. So we've got most of the girls up, the prototypes, the alphabet, and here's the eye chart, which we stretched. And then these are the ladies waiting to go on the other side of the wall. I think they're very clear about their purpose. And that comes through, and I won't read these, you guys can look at them. You know, for Ruben, it really is about a story. He's the storyteller. She's the feeling and the emotion. There is a democratic spirit to them of the high end and the low end. And above all, it's about craftsmanship. And I think at the museum it's very important that we look at design and fashion as we look at the rest of the arts. As I said, for me, they're the living arts. Um, and that we use the vocabulary as well in talking about them. I think you've seen that there's enough, they have enough connections, historical references that you'll be able to make that. When we do the tour in the gallery, we'll be able to go into more detail about, the shapes of the dresses, how they were made. But I think as you start doing your reading, and there's great stuff, I'll give you the video to look at. But really focus on this, what is it that distinguishes them and makes that creative synergy really work? And I think that's it. Yes?
Sarah, it's possible. I know you and Marilyn constructed some outcomes. The visitors who leave the exhibition won't be, and I think at the end there you pulled out that creative pair is
Yeah.
the biggest outcome that you're after.
It's to understand what the creative collaboration is.
Yeah.
You want people to see that artists working in fashion, how they work, how they think, how they problem solve through that. I think that appreciation for the art in the fashion and the design is important.
I'm going to encourage everyone because it was helpful for me. If you want to do a book club during this time, there's an incredible book called The Powers of Two.
Powers of Two.
And it is done by I can't think of his name right
Shank Wolf.
Joshua Wolf Shank. I think his relatives live here in town.
The Shanks, yeah.
But it is an incredible book looking at creative collaborations between a variety of folks, many of the folks that were in Sarah's early slides. So you can talk about the importance of collaboration, which is not something that is emphasized in education. We are, judged on our individualness, but yet society and creativity really thrives in collaboration. Powers of Two by Joshua Wolf Shank.
And he actually goes through and talks about, he tries to diagram it a little more about, and I tried to map some what they do. Again, it falls apart at one point. But it's really interesting because there's a very good, read about John Lennon and Paul McCartney, which is about what happens when it comes together, when it comes apart, and what that means. Yes.
I've heard clothes heavy. I realize the fabrics are lightweight, but there's so much fabric. Are they heavy?
I haven't worn any, but I have. No, no more than. No, they're amazingly light. We went through the archives and picked up, but the brocade. I know they look. I didn't say this. So the blue brocade dress, it looks really stiff and like it'd be really heavy. It juts out because of how it's cut, not because it's stiff. Heavy, or not because it's heavy, but because of how it's so. Not particularly. And Michelle Obama's was very light and breezy. Yes.
I think another aspect of this is the couture of this. I was able to go to the Jackie Kennedy couture show in Washington years ago with my sister, who's the most incredible seamstress. And she pointed out so many different things about couture, about how things are hidden. And it speaks to the flowing of the body. It's not your average seamstress kind of
Yeah, no, I sort of skipped over that. So thank you. Haute couture comes, I mean, this was traditionally Parisian design houses in which a garment was made specifically for an individual for a specific purpose. And there were designers, so the house of Coco Chanel. So you've got things that are made sort of individualized, that are made, they take your measurements, they make it specifically for you. It's made in a tradition of just in terms of how patterns are made and seams are made. There are special houses that actually do the embroidery, that they work with the couture houses. There has then in the more modern era become demi-couture, just to confuse you, which is that but clothing that is more everyday. And so some people talk about Isabel in terms of demi-couture. In my mind, she's working for her clients, she's making them. It really is that tradition of the French fashion house, but it's handmade. It's handmade, specifically made for people. She is often likened to the tradition of Balenciaga. So I didn't do a fashion history thing, but she's a Balenciaga you should look at. And she is really, as an American, very interesting. Claire McCardle and Bonnie Casson. They were women designers in the 50s who really made comfortable, ready wear when most of the world was looking at, Chanel and Givenchy. Yes? Nope. So, as I said, no. Yeah, so that's where it's very interesting.
Your analogy of the interpretation, too, that in some ways he interprets her ideas, her verbal ideas, and then, it's the ultimate true
Yeah,
collaboration.
going back and forth. And again, that's where the changes in. I know, it seems crazy, but she doesn't. And he never stops drawing. When we're meeting, he's drawing. Anything else? Yes? Yeah, and they did T-shirts for Target, which was a fundraiser for they're very involved with the museum and the barrio. I think the story of immigrants that, yes, they now run in some fancy circles, but, they're totally self-made in this country and, doing shoes for Payless. I think that that kind of connection for the everyday would help.
He spoke at the Wexner. We co-hosted his book came through town. We drove over him to talk at the Wexner.
So that's actually
Oh, sorry.
transition. So I want to thank you so much, Sharon.
Sure.
For all those
Okay.
wonderful stories. Thank you, Sai. So when we heard about this exhibition, we were extremely excited about
And you can tell by looking at me, I'm not really a fashion person, but we were extremely excited about how this exhibition and how this artistic and creative collaboration exemplified some of the key ideas that artists grapple with, and that young artists, children and adults, anyone interested in the artistic and creative processes, these are big ideas for them. Ideas like inspiration. Where do you get ideas from? How can you be open to the world? How can you find ideas? What do you do with ideas? How do you make them better? So these ideas of inspiration, transformation, and collaboration were really key ideas for us when we thought about visitors and creating engagement for visitors, young visitors and adult visitors. So when we were talking about our Artful Reading fifth grade partnership, we were asking, how can we activate, as I think most of you know, every year we choose a theme in collaboration with the Columbus City Schools visual arts faculty to say, what is a big idea that we can really sink our teeth into, and that we can find this theme throughout the building. And so last year it was journeys. This year it's inspiration, transformation, and collaboration. So when Megan and I were thinking about how we might want to introduce the Artful Reading theme to you this year, we thought, the power, and we do have a little bit of a presentation, but the value of having this room full of all of you is that we have all of your thoughts and perspectives, and we want to take advantage of that, right? We want to collaborate. We want to harness that power of the group. And so before we show you a little more, and we'll show you Jeff's video along this theme, we wanted to just share with you the script and then actually give you all 10 minutes and a gallery assignment to go out with one another, including docents who might not be on your team, so you might not have that many opportunities to collaborate with them, and go out and find your own hooks into the collection. How could you engage the kids on the tours around these questions of inspiration, transformation, and collaboration? And we have a little half worksheet to help prompt you if you want that. But I wanted to start by just sharing the script of the video that Jeff made because it really captures the big ideas that came up for us. So I'm not an actor, so you'll have to forgive me. Should I adopt a British accent? Does that make it better? Okay, so where do ideas come from? How can you find your own ideas? If you keep your eyes open and your mind working, if you slow down, if you look everywhere you go, you might notice something interesting. If you look at something differently, it could be the start of an idea. What if you combine ideas? What about adding an idea to make something new, or transforming an idea into something unexpected? What happens when we collaborate and when we imagine and create together? Artists collect from the world around them, and they can draw inspiration from almost anything. Artists seek inspiration, they combine, they transform, they elaborate, and they collaborate to create things that the world has never seen. How will you think like an artist? So we wanted to share this with you just to give a sense of the framing that the students will have, the fifth grade students will have before they come here for the visit. And we want to ask you to engage in this exploration with us. So we have some of these purple worksheets here with some gallery assignments. We're going to ask you to go to, so at the top, there's a gallery, and then a list of some of these big ideas, so combining ideas, inspiration, transformation, collaboration. Some of these might not be visible in the final product, but these are just to get you thinking about what this tour experience could look like. So going to the gallery, meeting up with the other folks who've been assigned to your gallery, it should be groups of maybe 4, finding works, and then sharing with the group, having a conversation with your fellow docents about how you might use a particular work in that gallery to explore the idea of inspiration, transformation, and then sharing it with your gallery group, and then coming back here and we'll do just a quick share out. And so that way we can sort of crowdsource what did other docents find to activate this theme. Sound clear enough? Does anybody have any? It's a little ambiguous. It's a little bit like what we ask our visitors to do when they come here, right? But does anybody have any questions that are going to help you to do this thing that we're asking you to do? All right, so we're going to give you these. Please, we're going to hand these out. Can you help hand those out? I can help hand those out. Yeah, we can stand by the doors and we'll head up and then come back. I don't know how to show it. We'll come back here in 15 minutes at 5 till. All right? start sharing that experience out a little bit. Just for my own curiosity, could you raise your hand if somebody in your group chose a work of art that really kind of surprised you at first, that you didn't necessarily think, wow, that's an odd choice? No? It's a testimony to how thoughtful and open-minded you all are. So, yeah.
How everyone reacted when they walked in the gallery. Everybody went to a different piece and then very quickly talked about its collaboration, its inspiration, things of that sort. So that within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, we had a variety of choices before us, all of which were valid, and yet we had a harder time, I think, narrowing it down to one that we would do in terms of the presentation. But it was 5 people with 5 images and 5 ideas, all of which sparked our imaginations about how we could use the gallery.
That's great. I hate to say that. Great. What else stood out for you? We'll work out later. Who had a different experience, or who wants to build on that? Were there any groups where you all kind of reached an easy consensus, this is the work that most speaks to the theme? Yeah. Who wants? Could you tell us what that was like?
Well, first we couldn't go in our gallery because they said they were hanging things there, so it was okay. We just immediately started walking through the museum, and we ended up in the social issues gallery. And we to go on and do what we chose Supper by Joseph Hirsch. And we thought for 5th graders it would bring out a lot of discussion, especially if we kind of set the tone that, no wrong answers and you can tell us anything. So we talked a lot about how you don't judge a book by a cover, you don't judge people by the color of their skin. We noticed how much respect they were getting paid. It looked like you were possibly in a homeless shelter. Talked about the fact of the difference in the color, the really dark clothing men were in and the fine white linens, and talking about skin color and different things that would come up. So kind of setting the tone, even as a docent, that anything you talk or decide can be the right answer.
That's great, and that's a really interesting example of inspiration from really different sources, right? And I love that you sort of role-played it and you thought about who the audience is going to be, what are something that might come up. Great. Did anyone else pick a work that you thought, who picked a work you thought, I would actually come back here with a group of 5th graders? Yeah. Can you tell us what the work was and what your conversation was like?
We picked The Sunflowers by Illinois. So when we walk, you walk in that room, there's lots of good choices, but we went with the idea that he chose we normally would think of as a lovely pastoral scene of a landscape and transformed it into something that really told a different story. And the way in which he used the layers of paint to make it a little more missing in addition to the colors. And then we also talked a little bit about, from a questioning perspective, the fact that maybe the sunflowers are people going through that situation, and then asking the students to think of themselves as something in nature, a tree or a flower or something, what would that be? Or just getting them to stand there and imagine themselves as those sunflowers going through that store.
I heard when I was floating around sighing, I heard someone in your group say sunflowers are an interesting symbol to transform in that way because they are so sunny and smiling, huge and bold. Who else chose a work that you want to come back to on a tour? Carol.
Our group chose unanimously Figures Round a Table by Candlelight, and we thought it exemplified the combining. The image itself was an exemplification of combining ideas, inspiring, and people having their ideas transformed. We were interested in what the story was, and we spent a lot of time trying to parse what exactly the faces said, what the hands say. Betty, what else did we do?
Let's see. Well, we talked a lot about the light and where the light source was, and we weren't, we sort of knew, but we didn't know exactly all of it. One light was a candle, and the other, maybe it was a hidden light, we weren't sure. We talked about body language and how their body language should interpret what that gives us when we look at a picture with people in it, especially if they're portraiture and all facial features.
We were hoping to get the story from whoever our audience might be.
Yeah, and one of the people in the group mentioned that they always use the body language and facial features to get the kids to see what is the emotion of either those people or the painting itself.
Our group is in the Cubist gallery. We had a little trouble deciding what to pick, so we were
dividing our time among 3 or 4 different pieces. But we've settled on Arthur Dove's The Thunderstorm, and our questions that we developed were about how did he take what we typically think or see in a thunderstorm and use the shapes that he used, the big brown clouds and the colors too, but they fill the whole horizon, and where was he standing that he saw it that way, and the lightning bolts coming down as jagged shapes like that. What did he hear that inspired him that way to paint a thunderstorm in that way? And I think that's where our discussion was.
I love to listen to your talk about that because I totally saw the inspiration, the transformation. It's that's the kind of thing that happens when artists are like active sponges. I want to figure out if anybody can fix that metaphor for me. I'm hungry for a sponge that's active. Because artists gather up inspiration from everything, but it's not a photograph of a thunderstorm. It's not a very literal looking representation of a thunderstorm. But it's not abstract exactly either. It's how, that idea of inspiration transformation network I thought was I saw the connection really well. Anyone else want to share? Yeah. And then we'll go.
We were in gallery number 2, American Stories, and after a brief discussion about all the possibilities that were there, we settled on Spring Planting, Greenwich Village, 1913 by John Sloan. And immediately what grabbed us out was the 3 women working together as working class women, trying to produce a spring garden. They were turning the soil out. 2 of the women were smiling. The woman was standing back, even though she was wearing a very powerful floral print dress. She was standing back and not really participating, had a bit of a scowl on her face. But collaboration just sort of jumped out as between these 3 women, an observing woman, and then as we were looking at the painting, someone reminded us that it was painted by John Sloan, part of the Ashcan School, and he saw this scene from his studio window. So it was a direct observation, and he's known as a member of the Ashcan School for his attentiveness to people, individuals, and how he can convey something about their lives. And even though the urban environment they're in, the solid fenced garden that they have, is still gleeful when it becomes spring, that everybody starts to freshen up and has a reawakening. So he's using spring, he's using the people themselves to inspire the painting, and then collaboration is kind of clearly there from the women working together, or sort of working together.
Great. Yeah, that's a great comparison. The Ashcan School, they found inspiration in what a lot of people wouldn't have even considered to be a source of inspiration for a work of art. When we work with young artists, teen artists, I often hear from them, I don't know, I've just been feeling really uninspired. I'm just waiting for inspiration. It's like, it's not a lightning strike, right? All right.
So we were in Gallery 6, and our group very quickly settled on a painting in Gallery 6, which is the Folk Art Gallery. The artist is Jesse Unak, and the painting has an unpronounceable name, which I will attempt to pronounce. Something like that. So, since none of us know how to pronounce it. So we very quickly then came to 4 questions because we were very focused, and in an attempt to be expeditious, came up with our questions. So our questions were, did the artist have an animal in mind? And I don't know if any of you have noticed this painting. You don't even know what it looks like. It's right in the corner near the monkeys. I can tell you what it looks like after our questions. The second question was the artist influenced by Inuit culture, which might give you a clue? And is the image a feature of sea or land? And finally, did face painting, and could put in parentheses tribal face painting, influence the artist? So it's a painting of sort of a creature that could be a sea creature or a dream creature with what seem to be lots of arms and legs, and so yeah, it's open to lots of interpretation. I'm not sure that we touched on the idea of collaboration, and anybody who's in my group could stand up and say, yes, we did.
Great, thank you. Piqued everyone's interest. Did you want to share yours?
We were at Gallery 10, the Impressionist Gallery, and I think Deanna and I got there first, so we sort of picked a painting because we started talking about it. But we looked at Blanche Hochetay's Weeping Willows and thought, wow, you could use all 3 with her, of the words by her, because, we know that she was married to Monet's son, and she was taught art by Monet. So certainly there was a lot, both inspiration and collaboration, perhaps transformation as well there. But then we started looking at the very naturalistic scene by Barbizon. I think, and you pronounced his name at one time. We didn't write it down, so we'll have to not even try with that one, Margie. But anyway, we looked at it a little bit and thought, the light in that Barbizon painting really starts to nod toward the light in Impressionistic paintings. So we saw that perhaps that was part of the inspiration for the Impressionists, then to take it several steps further. We found ourselves talking like docents. I don't know whether anybody else did, but we kept sort of bringing ourselves back to saying, these are fifth graders, and we need to get it down there for them because they don't know as much about art as we do. So we came out with how was an outdoor scene like the clearing of wood and inspiration to the Impressionists? How did the Impressionists transform the traditional landscape? And how did technology, we know that painting from tubes outside really helped the Impressionists create their whole movement of art. So how the invention of the painting in tubes, and somebody in our group sort of talked down about the Toledos and how they were transforming and using technology and using their ideas then to transform as well as collaborate. And then Dan had mentioned there's a still life in there of a fruit basket by Monet, and she was asking how did the relationship between the painter and the client also transform art and was an inspiration. We thought about Isabel sitting down with her clients and designing just for them. So we didn't maybe get into the nitty-gritty of the art like some of you in talking about it specifically, but we did talk about how important comparisons are when you talk about collaboration and inspiration and make transformation.
That's great. That's wonderful. And I love how every group approached it in different ways. That is exactly what we were hoping would happen, is that we would see from all of you. We'd be surprised. We would be fueled by the different perspectives that you all took to this prompt. So I'm going to kick it over to Megan, and we will let you.
Okay. Yes, those are all really great ideas, and I'd like to collect your purple worksheets, and so I can compile these and make kind of a little binder or resource for us all to refer to before we start the CCS tour. So please don't crunch it or lose it. I'll collect this at the end, or we can get them now. And then also, if you either today or when you're walking around the galleries get that light bulb moment of a really great painting that will fit with our theme this year, please just send me an email and we'll have a list going with some thumbnails and possible questions. So let's all tackle this together, and I'll keep our ideas together. That's what it's all about, really, right? Collaboration. Yes. Okay, so we are going to actually watch Jeff Sims' video, Think Like an Artist, and this will be shown to our fifth graders this year, hopefully before they come. Yeah, so we'll pause here and watch.
Where do ideas come from? How can you find your own ideas? Keep your eyes open and your mind working. Slow down. Everywhere you go, you might notice something interesting. Maybe if you look at it differently, it could be a start of an idea. What if you combine ideas? How about adding to an idea to make something new? Or transforming it into a different idea. What happens when we collaborate? When we imagine and create together? Artists find inspiration just about anywhere. They combine, transform, elaborate, and collaborate to create things the world has never seen. How will you think like an artist?
Okay, so that's a little something to get our brain juices flowing. Same with the fifth graders, hopefully inspire us. So we're just about done with today's training, but I know you're wondering, what about slideshow? What about all the other things you usually do for artful reading training? Well, we're working on the slideshow. No, we're done with that. Thank you. We're working on a slideshow, working on a script for the DIS docents to use when they're in the classrooms, and you will all get this. We're going to have some little mini trainings in October on your regular day, so we won't all be together, but a scheduled day where you can come in, see the slideshow, get the script, so you have a bigger idea of what the fifth graders will be seeing and talking about before you meet them here. You also may be thinking, what about the art project? Well, the CCS teachers, Becky Coyne and Cassie Hurley, are working the art project, still kind of getting the game plan ready for the year. And we will have the art project to show you in a few weeks. Hopefully when you come to the slideshow, get a script.
So Cassie is actually transitioning out, so it's creating a little bit of hiccup, but we'll have it all ready to go. She's just changing roles in the district. But Becky and Megan and I had talked about maybe collaboratively creating something similar to those weaving paintings that Sarah Rogers mentioned earlier, where they take strips and they design the strips and they weave them together. So every student would design a strip and then weave it together, and then as a group collaborate on that. So it has that sort of collaboration and transformation piece. But we are still, as Megan said, we're still finalizing that. Collaboration is wonderful, and it can also be challenging. It takes time, but we get something so much better in the end, right?
Yes, so you'll at least get to see this art project, and if we have enough docents who are interested in actually doing it, experimenting with materials, and doing that yourself, we can schedule that too. We would do it here on probably on a Monday in the studio. So that is to come as well. So this year, everything's being revealed in small chunks, but that's less pressure for all of us, right? Are there any questions about all of this?
It absolutely do, and what has happened over the past few years, because Becky Coyne, who's the coordinator for visual arts professional development, and she's also an elementary art teacher up Forest Park, she's done a lot to unite the primary and the secondary art teachers. So in fact, for the past 3 years or so, more and more of the high school and middle school group are also doing the art project and sort of tweaking and making it their own. So what we did last year, what CMA Teaching Arts did last year, was as part of Artful Reading, as part of the IMLS Making Creativity Visible initiative, did 2.5 days professional development with the visual arts teachers over there. And one of those days, we had Kat Lynch, Michael Vole, and Stephanie go and do a different art project. It was exploring the same theme. So we basically said to them, the theme is journey. These are some of the questions that the teachers are interested in having the students explore. What might you do? You teach art workshops here. What might you do? And then lead the teachers in that exploration. So in the end, actually got 4 different lesson plans, one from each of our teaching artists and one from the district, to say, these are just different ideas. These are starting points. So I would say probably half to 2/3 of the 5th grade classes do the art project, and a handful of high schools do it as well. You come on CCSA for Families, you'll see a display of many of the works of art that have been made. Not every teacher gets it together to display it, but that's the big showcase. Was that what you were going to say, Cheryl? Okay.
Next Sunday in April.
Yes.
Anything else? Yes. Any other questions? Okay, I want to thank you all for sticking through to this last part. It's really the working together and thinking together is what makes these trainings really valuable, I think. So thank you so much. We'll be hearing more about the Toledo exhibition at the Docent Social. That's the 3rd Thursday in October, I believe. No, 13th. Is that the 2nd Thursday in October? Okay, so that's in the evening. So make sure you get your RSPs in there to see Toledo's. So not the people there. All right, thank you.